Others.
Greetings and welcome, everyone. We'll take a minute to allow everyone to enter our virtual meeting space. I see lots of people logging on. Welcome. We'll take just a few minutes while everyone's logging in. All right. I think folks are still filing in, but I think we can get started for the sake of time. Greetings, everyone. I'm Kathy King, International Vice President for Lambda Alpha International. And I'm currently also a board member, and I was past president of the Los Angeles chapter. Thank you so much for engaging with us today as we hear from industry leaders on the topic of coastal water quality. This is the second in our new series. It's a global webinar series, an exploration of the relationship between water and land economics. The topic of water, too much, not enough, and declining quality has rapidly become a serious issue facing so many of our LAI chapter communities and jurisdictions, and affecting the stability of urban areas and agricultural resources alike. So as you hear today's program, please consider participating in the water group. It's a diverse group of professionals and experts in various aspects of water, of the water and land economics nexus. And let us know if you're interested by posting something in the chat box. We're especially thrilled to welcome a lot of guests today. For over 90 years, our Land Economics Society has recognized professionals who are outstanding in a variety of disciplines, and we've been bringing them together to learn, network, and even travel together to experience local development projects around the world as we visit our chapters. And we see, we really get an inside perspective up close, under the skin, as some have said, under the skin of our cities. So big shout out to our international leadership. Thank you so much, and particularly Holly Elmore for organizing today's program around her leadership and her fabulous interest in building a presence for LAI in the Central Gulf region. We're going to continue focusing on development and land stewardship issues that intersect chapters and bring professionals together, identifying programs, policies, and governance and best practices that we can share. So for the next global program, it won't be part of this water series, but we're going to have a webinar on the topic of affordable housing on April 21st. So the official notice and list of panelists is yet to come. So keep your eyes open. We'll be posting that. So I have just a couple super quickly, these slides. We talked about the water series. We're looking forward to many, many more, and including our chapters all around the world. We have 29 chapters. Also to our members, just a reminder that you can download our member V-cards by going on to our website, log into your account, and click on the member directory, and you can download member V-cards for networking and sharing. Also, we're super excited. I mentioned traveling earlier. This year, our Land Economics Weekend, our annual gathering, is going to take place in Barcelona. So mark your calendars, make your travel plans, and we would love to see you there. Really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great program. And then also a reminder that LAI has, our land economics foundation is such a critical part of our outreach, and has a fabulous presence all throughout all of our chapters. When you sign up and pay your dues, we ask for a donation to the Land Economics Foundation. They're doing a lot of great research and funding, and we're bringing the results of those projects through our grants into our global webinar series. So you can see the results of that research. So we encourage you to log on to our website anytime, members, non-members alike, to get more information. So the moderator of today's program is Jim Musbach. He is co-chairing the new water group with me. Jim is, he hails from the Golden Gate chapter. He's a current board member there and a past president. And he's also a senior principal with EPS in San Francisco and many other offices. So today's panelists are David Tomasco, who's executive director of the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, Sandy Gilbert, who chairs Solutions to Avoid Red Tide, also known as START, Christine Johnson, president of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast, and John Thaxton, senior vice president of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Dave is going to begin with an overview of the West Coast water challenges. And to keep the program moving, each panelist will introduce the next. Thank you everyone for your time and sharing your expertise. And to our fabulous audience, please post your questions in the question and answer. And Jim is going to be addressing them after we finish the presentations. Thank you.
They need to post it in the chat, Kathy.
What did I say? Oh,
question and answer.
Yeah.
Which I don't hear, just here. So
thank you.
Am I waiting for an intro or should I start?
Dave, you should begin. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, that's an inauspicious start. All right, so let me speed up a little bit. Sorry, guys. All right, so I have the next slide, please. When we talk about Sarasota Bay is like a lot of coastal estuaries. We have to be concerned with managing water quality, and ecosystem health means for us, we have to be concerned with managing nitrogen, which is one of the nutrients that can cause what we call imbalance. So next slide, tap it one more time. When you talk about the health of an estuary, whether it's San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, or Sarasota Bay, the only thing you usually have to measure is the water itself. So take a bottle, dip it off the boat, and measure the chemistry of it. But there's more to the health of Sarasota Bay than that alone. So next one, please. So all of these things are things that we or our partners measure and monitor. So we measure things like seagrass, which is the underwater plants that are essential habitat for fish and crabs and shrimp, and seafood. It's food for manatees. We measure the amount of algae that's not only floating around in the water, but also tumbling around on the bottom, the fish populations, the seagrass, all these things are measured, and they all go into our report card. Next, please. So our report card has 4 metrics. 2 of them are water chemistry, and then one of them is collected by volunteers, macroalgae, and one of them is mapped every 2 years. We have 5 different bay segments, and the lower ones, Roberts Bay, Little Sarasota Bay, and Blackburn Bay, are collectively referred to as the lower bay. We take all our results and we compile it all together, and we color code the results for each bay segment for each year, because it doesn't matter if the number is 2.1 or 1.8. The reality is what matters is the pattern over time and over space. So we color code the results. Blue and green is good, yellow is cautionary, and red is, stop, something's going wrong. So next one, please. So across the bay, 2006 to 2012, we were a healthier system, lots of blues and lots of greens. Palmasola Bay in the upper part continues to be a healthy part of our bay. But in the area that we call Upper Bay, it shifts into the yellow in 2017, 2018, comes out of it and goes into the green and blue after that. But 2017, 2018 represent, we think, problems associated with the 2016 red tide, which you'll hear more about. 2017's Hurricane Irma. 2018 was a red tide that was 10 times as strong as the 2016 one. But then we start to see improvements in water quality after that, at least until 2021. But in the lower bay, Roberts, Little, Sarasota Bay, and Blackburn Bay, they shift into the yellow back in 2013. So we can't blame that on like a red tide or a hurricane, because that actually occurs before that. So something different is going on in lower bay that drops it into the yellow region in 2013. But then we actually start seeing some improvements in the latter couple of years, say 2019 to 2021, things start looking a little bit better. Next, please. So if you're familiar with seagrass, they're underwater plants. They're essential for fish and crabs and shrimp. The loss of seagrass is the reason why we have so many starving manatees in Florida, particularly on the East Coast, where in the Indian River Lagoon, the amount of biomass of seagrass is down 90–95%. So we use it as an indicator as well. We're down 5% in the last 2 years. That's not good news, but we were down 18% in the 2-year period before that. So we think that we're starting to hopefully bottom out in terms of the loss that we've had. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the problems that we've seen in the last couple of years. But we're lower than we were 6 years ago by about 26%. That's not as bad as the Indian River Lagoon, but it's about halfway there. But we're still better than we were in the 1980s. And that's kind of the key here. We're not as good as we were 10, 15 years ago, but we're still better water quality than we had about 30 years ago. Next, please. So why did we get bad? Well, we got bad for a couple of things. Number one, over 750 million gallons of treated but high nutrient wastewater effluent came into our lower bay 2013 to 2019. We'll show you a little bit of that, but that's mostly under control. Next, please. Impacts from Piney Point. If you're not familiar with Piney Point, it's an industrial wastewater facility that makes fertilizer right next to Tampa Bay. And we had an overflow of 200 million gallons with a nutrient concentration 10 times higher than that wastewater treatment plant that we just talked about in the bullet point above. Next, please. And then the last big thing that's happened to us, Hurricane Ian. Hurricane Ian changed our water chemistry dramatically for between 2 to 4 weeks. We'll show you some data on that. Next, please. So this is the kind of science that we use to try to figure out what management actions need to be taken. This is, for example, nitrogen concentrations at the farthest downstream location in the biggest watershed in our bay. That's what those little dots are. The red line represents the best mathematical fit to explain the pattern. And as you can see, it's not just going up or not just going down, or it's not changing. It went up and then it came down. And that block of in that yellow block represents kind of like the increase, the peak, and then a decline from the maximum nitrogen concentrations at that location. So why did that happen? Next, please. That is the same 5-year period during which we had 750 million gallons of wastewater treatment plant treated effluent, but high nutrient content come out into our bay. And so that is a management action that has been acted upon that is no longer occurring, and that effluent is now going to be much better. Next slide. So what we had in 2021 in the spring was Piney Point. We had this plume. This is representing the movement of that contaminated water 2 months afterwards. And that kind of color pattern where it's kind of blue-green, that represents 1,000-fold dilution, which you might go, oh, it's 1,000-fold dilution. But this stuff was so concentrated that 1,000-fold dilution is still enough to increase the nutrient supply 50 to 70%. Tampa Bay is 250 square miles in size. Sarasota Bay is just to the south of it. And as you can see, that area that's influenced by that plume is several hundred square miles in size. It absolutely adversely impacted Sarasota Bay, even though we're around the corner from where that discharge happened. Next, please. So what happened after Piney Point? This is an algal bloom that's growing from the bottom of the bay. It's not picked up in a water sample, but it was really important. Next, please. Because it comes up to the surface, and when it comes up to the surface, it's called mermaid's hair or snot grass or fireweed, causes contact dermatitis, can kill dogs if they eat it. Next one, please. And we quantify that. This is a transect that we swam the bottom of the bay to measure how much macroalgae is there. That white buoy there represents the seaward extent of our transect. That between that and the mangroves, that's not a mudflat. That's that same algae growing up from the bottom of the bay. Next, please. So we had not only ecological impacts, we had economic impacts. This stuff looks and smells like sewage. It's not sewage, but it looks and smells like it. Turned a whole lot of people off. Really easy to get waterfront dining, except nobody else would be sitting around you during those times. Next one. Then the next thing that happened is the very next year we had Hurricane Ian. We were not close to the landfall of it. We were, about 60 miles away, but we had 5 to 15 inches of rainfall. We had winds that got up to 85 miles an hour. We had no storm surge. But this picture shows the same kind of general location before and after Hurricane Ian. This is Blackburn Bay down around a little bit north of the city of Venice in Florida. And you can see the difference in the water chemistry. Next, please. So we measured water chemistry at 1, 2, and 4 weeks after that. We visited 3 sites in each of 3 bays. So this kind of shows on the left-hand side the level of bacteria. The red line represents the never to exceed value. And what you can see is in the lower portion of our watershed, we exceeded the bacteria levels for about at least 2 weeks, but by 4 weeks, things were back to normal. The amount of algae in the water was elevated, which is on the right-hand side, was elevated above our targets for at least 2 weeks in all bay segments. But by the time we got to 4 weeks, things are back to normal. So our impacts from Hurricane Ian were somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks in length. Next one, please. So how did our water chemistry get better? It got better because it flushed out into the Gulf of Mexico. And unfortunately, what that did is it created a very large red tide bloom in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is satellite imagery from the European Copernicus satellite. And the warmer colors, the oranges and the yellows, represent an algal bloom. The red represents a very high red tide. And what you can see is, yeah, we had a little bit of an algal bloom before Ian, but a week after Ian, we had an algal bloom that was several hundred square miles in size. And 8 weeks after, 2 months afterwards, we still had a very substantial red tide located right off our coast that we think was associated with the runoff that came from that hurricane. Last slide, please. So we got a lot of challenges ahead. We kind of look at this as a 3-legged stool. We need the regulated community to have the budgets they need to do what they need to do for wastewater and stormwater. We need the regulators to do their job. Wastewater overflows, they're going to happen, but we had that overflow happen for 5 years. And then we have the informed and the engaged stakeholders. They're going to be the next 3 people you hear from. So you're going to hear from John Thaxton, you're going to hear from Christine Johnson, you're going to hear from Sandy Gilbert. All these people are important stakeholders to help us get to where we want to be to actually implement this recovery of Sarasota Bay that we think is actually something we can do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Thaxton.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it. Let me get my camera on here. Sorry about that. Not that people really want to see this face, but there you have it anyway. So my name is John Thaxton. I'm the Senior Vice President for the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Community Playbook for Clean Waterways, hereafter called Water Quality Playbook. And I'm going to begin, as we do at Gulf Coast, with all of our public addresses. And our motto is that, if I can go back to the first slide, please. I'm still on that one. Thank you. We transform our region with our donors through bold and proactive philanthropy. And this playbook, Community Playbook for Healthy Waterways, was actually an approved activity from the Gulf Coast Board of Directors. And we find one of the roles for a community foundation in a region is that there are oftentimes things that we can do as a private third-party entity that government cannot do, and that industries that have an interest in an issue cannot do. So we look at this role very seriously, and the Water Quality Playbook is an example of that. Just a couple overriding rules about the playbook. This playbook was specifically designed for Sarasota County in order to keep the focus manageable, but it was constructed and is intended to be a template for other communities to follow. We designed the playbook with the audience in mind of policymakers, elected officials, and permit reviewers. This was a big decision for us. Typically, documents like this are focused towards the general population. We intentionally focused this one at the policymakers. And we also made a decision to have this, next slide, please. We also made this decision to have the document only web-based. And this enabled us to make frequent changes as technology improvements or degradations happen. We could keep the playbook current and usable, as opposed to a stagnant document that would become useless within a very short period of time. If you were to go to the website and Google Sarasota County, you will see on our Chamber of Commerce's, our major industries, our economic development corporations, you will see water featured as the prominent feature in Sarasota County. And I say this not as an anecdotal observation, but I believe it to be empirical evidence that our water is the basis of our economy and really creates the quality of life that all 460,000 residents, whether you're on or near the water or not, enjoy in Sarasota County. So we think it's very important. And my board saw in 2017 with the red tide a direct threat to our economy. We actually saw a local economic recession that was caused by red tide at that time, and that's what prompted them into action. I would note that at the time, the link between anthropogenic nutrients and red tide was not as well known as it was today. But we felt even in the absence of that link, it was the right thing to do because these nutrients were causing water quality degradations that were threatening our economy and public health anyways. So we invested in the water quality playbook and convened a lot of community partners to help us out. Next slide. I would also like to point out that Sarasota County has had decades and decades of investment in water quality. We were the first in the state to have a stormwater environmental utility, the first in the state to have a fertilizer ordinance, the first in the state to have a golf course management ordinance, and on and on and on and on. So as Dr. Tomasco described, over time, we saw some improvements to our water quality. But as we've seen in recent data, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And so the water quality playbook, next slide, specifically decided to focus on nutrients. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of discussion about nutrients. Dr. Tomasco is much more skilled and did a better job of that. But for those of us that are not scientists, the way that I like to describe it is that there is a nitrogen cycle, a natural nitrogen cycle that has been present in Florida and this country and in the world for eons and eons and eons. But with the advent of the ability to take atmospheric nitrogen, convert it to liquid nitrogen that could be then directly applied to plants, the nitrogen cycle was so disrupted that the absorption ability of that cycle was completely overwhelmed. And now we have a system where the natural cycle can no longer sequester all of the nitrogen that we're dumping into our surface waters. So what's used to be nutrients, something that provides nutrition, a basic essential for life, has now become a pollutant that actually threatens the very life that it once supported. Next slide. And I'm going to just bypass this next slide because I forgot that Dave had so much of the nutrients in his slide, and go on to the purpose, or as like we like to kid here, the porpoise of the water quality playbook. The first thing that we did is we convened a group of experts, diverse experts in terms of permitting and stormwater and wastewater and utilities and agriculture and business. And pretty much we locked them in a room and fed them pizza and told them that this is our goal. Our goal is that we were going to create a water quality playbook that addressed the reduction of anthropogenic nutrients to the greatest extent possible, hoping to restore the natural nutrient regime into Sarasota Bay. Sorry, Dave?
Sorry, my bad.
All right, into Sarasota Bay. We did this in coordination with all the permit agencies, and I use the word coordination very carefully. So we went to the Water Management District, we went to DEP, we went to the county, we went to the state, we went to all the agencies, and we told them what we were doing. We got their best available data, and I use the term coordinate because we did not ask their permission to publish this water quality playbook, and in fact we told them that we were going to do it with or without their cooperation. But fortunately, all of the agencies were very cooperative, and that enabled us to get access to the best data possible. Next slide, please. So the goal of the playbook here is described in these three different categories. The first one is the reduction of these anthropogenic-based nutrients with a specific focus on nitrogen, because as Dave said, our Sarasota Bay is a nitrogen limited or a nitrogen sensitive system. Phosphorus is a concern, but it's really not a big deal. It's the various forms of nitrogen that are causing all of the problem. And then the second part is to, if there are some nutrients that do find their way into the water that were not captured in the reduction mode, we wanted to have a strategy for actually removing them. And then the third is we wanted to build capacity and resilience in our system, in our government, in our community, so that the work that we do continues and the work that we do is enhanced. So my final slide is kind of an overview. Next slide, please. Next slide is the overview of the individuals that were participants in designing the water quality playbook. I want to start at the bottom and go up. Doctors Jennifer Schaefer and Dave Schaefer were the, along with Steve Swaw, a pretty well-known stormwater engineer in our area. They were the primary authors of this report. After the report was published, Gulf Coast Community Foundation handed off the maintenance of the website to the Schaefers and the Suncoast Science Council, so that we can keep it current. So these three individuals are still involved and doing updates to the playbook. We expect to have a very major update in the next few months. So please go and take a look at it. And then I would also bring to your attention the diversity of the individuals that contributed to the playbook. It took us, I would say probably 10, 15 meetings, upwards of 2 hours each. We started with brainstorming where there were no bad ideas, and then we narrowed and narrowed and narrowed it until we had the management activities that we thought that if Sarasota County were to deploy them, that Sarasota County would become the leader in the state of Florida for nutrient management. That was our overall goal that all of the persons on this list agreed to. And again, you can see the involvement with local government, the national estuary programs, because we do have two NEPs in our immediate area, the Charlotte Harbor and the Sarasota Bay. Sandy Gilbert, who you'll hear from a little bit later. And then the last person that I want to call your attention to is Christine Johnson. Christine Johnson is the president of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast, and she is our next speaker. And with that, Christine, I think I bought you an extra 4 minutes if you would like it.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. The next slide. Thank you. I thought this quote was quite appropriate for our talk today. It's one of my favorites because it really brings home in a very short number of words what we're talking about today, and that is the health of our waters depends upon how well we live on the land. Luna Leopold, of course, was the son of Aldo, but Luna in his own right was quite famous, and hopefully you all have heard of him. He was really the father of hydrology as we think about it today, and as we continue to think about it, and should think about it more than just economic. So next slide, please. So just a quick introduction of Conservation Foundation, and you can click twice and it'll come right up with our vision and mission. Who we are Land Trust, and we envision a future where the human and natural worlds of Southwest Florida flourish together. And our part in that is to protect the land and water in Southwest Florida for the benefit of people and nature. Next slide. So give you a little bit of a map. You saw a little bit of this map earlier, the top of it when Dave was talking. Our area, Land Trust, this Conservation Foundation's area, is from south of Tampa Bay, which is right above the W there, That's Tampa Bay. Our area goes from that area all the way down to the Everglades, which is where our name on the bottom right of that. That's the beginning of the Everglades down in Naples. So we're in 5 counties. Everything on the map you see that's green is protected. The numbers represent our projects. As you can see, a number of them have to do with protecting land on the coast, Gulf Coast. But I also want to make the point that everything in Florida has to do with water. We receive an enormous amount of rain every year. And so we also work on protecting land adjacent to our rivers. So we focus obviously on waterfront, but we also focus on areas where there's imperiled wildlife and connectivity. And we do have a vision for connecting up these large pieces of green areas of protected land throughout these 5 counties. But we also protect land for people, as we said in our vision, our mission, so that we have unique public access. We don't want to duplicate counties or state parks. And so we augment those wonderful public spaces. To date, in our 19 years, we protect 56 properties for over 19,200 acres. Next slide, please. So what is a land trust and how do we do this work and how does it really affect water? We'll get to some of that, but just so that you have a base understanding of what a land trust is we are a not-for-profit. And we work with willing landowners to conserve their land. We work with communities, whether they be the citizenry or whether they be the municipality itself. We partner with all of the cities and counties in our region, as well as the state and the national government to protect land, whether we receive their money or not. And of course, we take care of the land that we have protected. The IRS requires us to do that forever. The CPAs on my board get really excited and nervous when I talk about perpetuity, but that is what we exist to do, is take care of the land that we've protected forever. And next slide, thank you. So let's talk about how land conservation protects water quality and can improve it. So conservation easements, this tool that we use to save land, runs with the land forever, and conservation easements have to extinguish development rights. And because they do that, that limits the stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces of development, homes, driveways, parking lots, and such, which, we dump a lot of nutrients in our stormwater. So if we don't develop it, we don't have the impervious surfaces, we don't have those added nutrients into the runoff and the stormwater, limiting our nutrient loads. And furthermore, because we don't have those impervious surfaces, that land can hold the water, which is really important if we want to talk about storms and increased intensity of our storms. So because the land holds the water, of course, it prevents flooding. And if it prevents flooding, then it also prevents erosion, especially along those rivers that I was talking about earlier. Florida doesn't have mountains, but we still have valleys. They may only be a few inches, but water does run downhill, whether it's thousands of feet or just a few inches. And we need to prevent that erosion that Dave was talking about earlier, that increases the turbidity of the water and brings all of those nutrients into our rivers, which dump into our bays, which dump into the Gulf and cause us all those problems. But how can land conservation improve water quality? Well, again, because the land is protected and because those development rights are extinguished forever, it incentivizes restoration, either from the landowner or from the municipality or grant funding organizations, to know that their investment is going to stay invested in that property forever and not get undone and rewound by the current landowner or future landowners. So many of our funding agencies and organizations and foundations require that conservation easement exists before they will invest in restoration. And of course, restoration, I don't think I have to go into that, but restoration actually increases water quality, right? If we plant plants along those riparian, along those shore banks, those banks of rivers, or along a Gulf or intercoastal, it's going to hold that sediment, it's going to hold that land and not allow stormwater rushing through and bringing all of those nutrients and dirt into the rivers and bays and Gulf. Also, many conservation easements require best management practices, better known as BMPs, and require that the landowner manage the land with those BMPs. And as those BMPs change, they have to update their management practices. So here in Florida, most people don't realize that we are a huge cattle organization, state, that produces the cow-calves for our beef in the nation, as well as for exporting. And a lot of the conservation easements that we put on with landowners willing to save their ranches requires them to keep up with best management practices, so that they keep their cattle out of the rivers, so that they keep those cattle back from some of those water sources, so that they don't put nutrients so many hundreds of feet before the riparian land. And then finally, when we save land, when all land trusts save land, they're required to post signage all around on the borders of that protected land, educating those that are come up to the borders of the land. This is protected forever, and why. And that signage, as well as any marketing that we do to highlight the land being conserved, to highlight those funders who partner with us, or the municipality, state, federal, brings the community awareness and wants those communities want to be participatory in more land conservation, as well as water quality improvements. Next slide, please. So 2 quick projects that we're working on to give you an example of some of the work can be done for water quality. The first is this project known as rewilding the quad parcels. You see in this picture 4 pieces of property that were owned by Sarasota County. Next to, and it's off the screen to the right, a very large stormwater facility that 100 years ago was a marshland. It was called Big Camp Sawgrass. And so these 4 properties were going to be surplused by the county. We, Conservation Foundation, partnered with Sarasota Audubon Society to say, hey, wait a minute. This is right next to I think it's not an overstatement to say it is internationally known birding hotspot. So this marshland that was a farmland that the county purchased to do stormwater, to bring back some healthy marshland to this area and hold stormwater for development all around this area. To the left of this picture is I-75. The county wanted to surplus these lands and sell it for light industrial right next to hundreds of acres that is a tourism draw, as well as the home to many migratory birds in our area. So Florida is a birding hotspot, as many people know. Over 430 different species, over 340 have been documented at the properties just off to the right of this picture. So we partnered with Sarasota Audubon Society and said, wait a minute, county, is there anything else we can do? And a very long story short, they granted conservation easements over 3 of these properties and use agreements with Sarasota Audubon Society, because we presented an option for them, basically a window to get out from underneath enormous public support to not surplus these lands. So where we are in the project is this design that you see in front of you is to take the northeast quad, which is one with the pond on it, which has an ugly stormwater pond right now, and to make it a lot more beautiful, not only for humans, but as well for those birds. We're going to pull back the bank, make it more of a stepped instead of a steeped approach, where you see the number 6s around. And then we're going to plant trees, and we're going to plant plants. And we're going to put in some snags and number 3 and 5 here, so that we have as well some raptors. And we're going to make this a lot more beautiful with more trees, as well as for people, and have some sidewalks and benches. The bottom right one, or the southeast quad, we're going to create that ravine. That's not there currently. That ravine is going to be fed from the stormwater pond, holding even more nutrients on these two properties, more water, storm water, and we're going to rewild it. All these little dots on here that you see are trees. Number 13 is going to be a forest. Just to give you some scale, each one of these properties is an 11-acre property. We're going to limit people to the north of the property, where you see the number 12 and 11, the sidewalk. Number 14 is a bird viewing platform. But we're going to limit people on the southern part, number 13, in that forest. Again, trying to attract different types of birds that are not at the area off the picture on the right, but more warblers, if you will, more tree species of birds that we don't have in the stormwater pond that is really a marshland and stormwater facility. And then over on the south west parcel, you'll see a lot of the numbers. That's going to be a more activated spot for people versus the area that's all doesn't have any numbers on it. That's where the county kept some of the land available for them to build a building, because on the left portion of that picture is a lot of industrial right before I-75. So if you know anything about urban planning, it's kind of a step down approach from I-75 to light industrial to Sarasota County's one building that our conservation easement limits the county on how high it can be, how many square feet it can be, as well as impervious. And then on this small portion, it's about 5.5 acres, is where we have more active people. A parking lot, a picnic pavilion is number 18, and a natural play area for children. Don't think primary colors and swing sets, think logs and stones for them to build and use their imagination. So what are the benefits of all of this? We see improved water quality, we see improved habitat, and of course, improved amenities for people. Thank you. The next project is this municipal golf course that you see in the top right. That's Bobby Jones Golf Club. All of that yellow is 300 acres of this municipal golf course in the city of Sarasota, with heavy development all around it, as you can see. However, on the top right and the top left, you see green space. So Bobby Jones is a municipal golf course, as I said, that the city of Sarasota was going to, was considering what to do with the golf course that was declining, not being as financially viable. And what to do with it. And they were actually considering, because it was not zoned open use or public park space, it was zoned government use. So they were considering actually, again, surplusing this land for other not-for-profits, perhaps, or for government use buildings. Again, we stepped up and said, hey, wait a minute, let's look at the history of this. This property was a marsh. And by the way, it was called Little Camp Sawgrass, just like the prior project was called Big Camp Sawgrass. And 100 years ago, they decided that marshland was going to be great for a golf course. So let's think about actually bringing it back to wetlands. As you see, right underneath the Jones name, you see that's a canal that's man-made, that shoots water from a couple miles away, actually about 50 square miles of stormwater shoots through that canal. Another one runs along the roadway to the left of it. And then there's the smaller canal that you see exactly right there. So we said to the city, let's think about this. Let's reduce the number of golf holes. Let's create a larger stormwater restoration facility so that we can create marshland. And let's also think about how we can increase activities for people. So again, the benefits would be improved water quality, improved habitat, and diversified outdoor recreation. Next slide, please. And so the end result is what you see in front of you, where the city is now doing exactly that. In addition, they granted a conservation easement to Conservation Foundation, our organization, over the 300 acres, so that it can no longer be anything more intense than a golf course. You'll see they reduced it from 45 holes to 27. There is a driving range, but you see where all of the yellow, that's the wetland restoration project as well. And the yellow, of course, are paths to go through it. And they're connecting up to the county park, which is in the top right corner. They're connecting to their city park in the bottom left corner, and then connecting to the Legacy Trail, which is a hugely popular Rails to Trails program here in Sarasota. Next slide, please. So here's more information on us if you're interested, and absolutely wonderful partner you're going to hear from now, where they have funded some of these projects that we're talking about. It's Solutions to Avoid Red Tide, Sandy Gilbert, who has been a wonderful partner in some of these projects and more. Sandy?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, good deal. You've heard about nitrogen from virtually all of our speakers. That's really the main enemy. What I'm going to do is take you through the presentation that we give to local communities. The people all think the government's going to do everything to fix our water quality, and we're helping them to learn that they're a big part of the solution themselves. So you're looking at a presentation called the Healthy Stormwater Ponds, and it will show people how they can be a better steward of their ponds and keep the water that flows downstream and into the bay cleaner. Next slide, please. And again, we of course begin by telling them who we are, that we're START, that we're a nonprofit. We've been around since 1995, and these are all the various things that we do to help water quality. And next. And we tell them that what we are about to do with them is a function of something called the Healthy Pond Collaborative. It's a partnership with START in Sarasota County and the county's NEST program, the University of Florida's IFAS extension program in Sarasota County, the Science and Economic Environment Council of Southwest Florida. And together in Sarasota County, we work together on ponds. And in Manatee County, that partnership has been extended by the Barancik Foundation funding to include START and the Manatee County Department of Natural Resources. And we show them that we provide advice and funding on how to take care of their ponds, which we hope look like the one you're looking at. Next, please. First of all, what is a stormwater pond anyway? What does it do? It's designed to flood control the water running off the land, holding it for a while, and then releasing it downstream when the water can be better distributed. It also, which we're very interested in, filters out excess nutrients, particularly nitrogen and other pollutants. And of course, they also provide habitat for wildlife. Next. We have three objectives. We try to help control erosion, improve pond filtering efficiency. We're unhappy to learn that most of our ponds are a little older, 20 or so years, many of them are, and they've declined in efficiency in filtering. And they're only on average about 40 to 60% efficient, and we're trying to improve that. And of course, we want to help them do that with a cost-efficient pond maintenance program. Next. The first thing we have to get across, we have a lot of people that come, like myself, down to Florida from up north, and they're quite disturbed to see that their ponds don't look like lakes. And the reason they don't look like lakes is they aren't lakes. Lakes are very different from Florida stormwater ponds. They are naturally formed, much larger, deeper, and clearer. There's almost no vegetation in the lakes. And most importantly, they basically require little or no maintenance. You don't really have to take care of them. You might have to take care of that dock in the picture, but you don't really have to take care of the lake. Next. But the ponds in Florida are very different. They're man-made. They were put in by the developer. They're permitted by governments in SWIFMA, our water group. They're shallow, only 6 to 12 feet, and they change. They evolve and change over time with wind and water impacts. And most importantly, they have to be maintained to remain healthy. Next. And stormwater ponds are part of a system. Some of them are just connecting ponds. This one at one of our major local communities also runs through a wetlands. So it's either a series of ponds, that all of which of course are man-made, and then some wetlands with control boxes to release the water further. And they all are in a link in a system, whether they have a linked control box or they have natural wetlands or not, they all flow from one to the other, which many people don't always realize. Next. This is what a healthy Florida stormwater pond should look like. You'll notice it's a lot different looking than that lake I showed you. First, it must have a no-mow zone that's at least 8 to 12 inches high and at least 3 feet wide. That's that tall grass you see next to the pond. It also has a good deal of vegetation in the pond on what they call the littoral shelf or the shallow area of the pond. And we like to see that area at least 30 to 50% planted with plant density. Next. The problem is many of our ponds look like this. They don't have a no-mow zone. They don't have plants in the water, and this leads to problems. Next. The first one and most common reason we're called in is because of poor water clarity, unsightly algae blooms, and of course that leads to what? An unhealthy pond, and there's no surprise you don't see any wildlife in it. So people tend to call us for this problem, and we help them learn how to control algae with a no-mow zone. Taller grass helps keep out the grass cuttings and the fertilizer out of the pond. The deeper roots also help absorb more nutrients, and the aquatic plants will crowd out the algae, shade the sunlight from the algae that it needs, and most of all, absorb nutrients that the algae needs to grow. And of course, it reduces the need for herbicides, particularly the copper sulfate that we don't like to see used. But the big thing we're learning is to control algae is much more than that. You must understand and learn how to properly irrigate and fertilize your lawns. Many communities are using way too much water on their lawns, and that tends to directly seep into the ground, run into the pond, and bring nutrients with it. Much of the water that enters a pond does not flow over the surface. It goes into the ground because we basically have sand as our soil, and it goes into the pond underground, bringing the fertilizer with it in the water table. So again, we are literally showing people that they're actually fertilizing their ponds by watering too much. Next. And again, this pond that many people think is just fine will soon look like this, which is even more serious. Next slide. Because it has no mow zone, it will begin to erode the banks and look like this. This is a very, very slow, one at a time. This is a very costly problem. Next slide. This is geotube. It's a type of inflated tube filled with soil and things to balance an eroding bank. Notice the cost of this. For per linear foot to do this process, it costs $70 to $100. And some pond communities have miles of shoreline. This gets very expensive. We work with people that are literally spending $1 million to fix their ponds. This is what we hope to avoid. Next. Even more expensive is GeoWeb. That's about $100 to $150 per linear foot. Next. And of course, if it's really bad and you have to dredge, you're looking at $150 to $200 a linear foot. Next. So you can control erosion, and this is what we try to teach people. If you can have a big, good, healthy no-mow zone, you will keep the heavy lawnmowers off the immediate bank, which of course is a main reason for weakening it and causing erosion. And it's this process of fighting erosion that we find as our main selling point to communities, because they're adopting healthy pond principles to avoid paying those costs that I just showed you, because doing our plants is a good deal less expensive. Next. And we also show them, you know, because some people don't like how certain ponds look. Again, they're used to those lakes that they're accustomed to up north. We say there are all kinds of ways to do this. You can do this in a so-called wild or preserved look, like at this place called Rivendell. This is a budding Ostrich-Shire Park. And so this is a very appropriate look. For other communities, the next slide, you can see a little more what we call the natural style, not as quite as wild as the preserved look, but still a real natural look to the pond. And lastly, next, this is the tailored look, which many communities prefer, because it's a use of a no-mow zone and plants, but it's a little more of what we call a tailored look. And this is a very, very popular look and convinces people that no, their view of the pond isn't going to be blocked by tall grass. Next. And we show them that what some of these littoral plants look like can be very, very attractive. Most of them bloom, and it really does brighten up the landscape. Next. So, in summary, a healthy maintenance pond program features the no-mow zone, the need for aquatic plants. You've got to modify your irrigation and fertilizing, and the reduced use of herbicides. You do this, and you're going to have a pond that's healthy, and you're going to be very glad that you did it. Next. We also show them it's cost effective. Again, we show them what the cost would be to deal with it in terms of repairing a bank, but the cost to mow and do other things is not increased, we find, in most communities. And the cost of the aquatic plants that our grants give that go in the water, they're as little as $1 to $1.50. Some of them are $2.50 per linear foot. A lot different than $100 or $70 a linear foot. Even shoreline plants are inexpensive. And of course, people can start and develop it over time. You don't have to spend the money all at once. So again, we also use volunteers a great deal, which can reduce the costs. Next. So the benefits are that you improve your flood control because you're not filling your pond with eroded soil and limiting its ability to hold water. You're stabilizing your bank. You're reducing the unsightly algae, and it reduces the need for costly and damaging algal control. Next. So there are many other benefits that the community gets in terms of things to do in lifestyle. Next, these all go very fast. Looking at wildlife that's come back. Next. Fishing. Next. Photography. A lot of people are taking pictures of these places. Next. And a better and more attractive place to gather for social events. Next. But most important, and the real message we have, it's an investment in your community. A house on a clear pond, according to the Real Estate Association, is 20% more valuable than the house on an unsightly pond of the same size and the same community. Next. And then we try to bring them into the broad message. Why are we helping you fix your ponds? Why does START care about your ponds? Because Sarasota Bay has too much nitrogen in it. Seagrass coverage is down. Red tide is up. stormwater runoff accounts for 65% that nutrients and Dave and John were talking about in the bay. And again, as we mentioned earlier, most ponds are only running about 40 to 60% efficiency. We want to fix that. Next. And most importantly, we know that it works. We don't have a lot of data on this. We're getting more in this collaborative I'm working on, but look at these numbers. Water clarity in a community after 20 months that employed an no-mow zone and aquatic plants would improve by 50%. So if they could see in the water for 2 feet when they started, they now can see down into the water 3 feet. Chlorophyll was reduced by 50, I think it says 4% there. Phosphorus 30 and nitrogen 22, and that's only after years of things flowing into the pond. In 20 months, it's down 22%. So there are results that are very exciting. So we tell people be part of the solution, start your own program. Next. Watch your watering, there's funding available. Go ahead. And lastly, let's get to work on your program. Let me give you an example of what the Healthy Pond Collaborative has achieved in the last year. We have visited over 35 communities. We have given 20 grants to towns, to communities in both Sarasota and Manatee County. In Sarasota County, we have planted 4.3 miles. That's miles, 4.3 miles of new pond plants in these communities. In Manatee County, we planted another 2.9 miles. This is major results of the people being involved in helping to deal with nutrients. And now to give you a summary of how the Bay stands today, some of the progress we made and some of the challenges we still face, I want to give you back to Dave Tomasco with the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. Dave, will you take over and sum this up for us? Dave?
Thanks a lot, Sandy. And so if you weren't aware of just how involved this community is in getting this bay back to normal, then you are now. So that's one of the reasons why we're pretty comfortable that we're going to actually be successful here. So next, please. So this is the trend I showed you earlier of seagrass as our sort of like holistic ecological indicator, and it showed the increase and then it showed the recent decrease. What I'm going to do now is focus a little bit on that blue bar there, which is what our reference period is. So if you remember the reference period from the report card, that's when it was mostly greens and blues. And so that reference period shows where the bay got a lot better, a lot more seagrass in a fairly short period of time. So what was so important about the reference period? So next slide, please. So the thing about the reference period is the nutrient concentrations were lower. No part of the bay was impaired for chlorophyll. That means it had less algae in the water. Where we have data on macroalgae, which is the tumbling stuff on the bottom of the bay, there was less. Next, please. And we had that 28% increase in seagrass coverage, which is all these good things. So why was it better? Because our nutrient loads were lower. Bay-wide, about 20%. That gives us our preliminary nitrogen load reduction target of about 12 tons. So all the really good stuff you've seen from John and from Sandy and from Christine, all this stuff can be fit into that. Are we getting to the 12 tons of dissolved inorganic nitrogen? Because we don't want to just say you have to do good stuff. We want to tell you exactly how much we need. And this is our best estimate. So how do we come up with that? Next slide, please. You got to have a good model, and we have a very good model. It's not perfect, but it's very good. It's a pollutant loading model, and we're focusing on dissolved inorganic nitrogen, which is kind of like liquid fertilizer. And if we compare that reference period, 2006 to 2012, to the latter years of 2013, 2019, the nutrient loads increased by 20% or 12 tons. So basically, if we want to get back to that healthier system we had when the bay was doing better, we got to get our nutrient loads back. Next one, please. So are there 12 tons of controllable loads? And the answer is yes. You've heard about reclaimed water. Reclaimed water is basically water that comes out of a wastewater treatment plant. And it can have a very low nutrient concentration if it's in what we call an AWT plant, advanced wastewater treatment. But we don't have any right now in Sarasota County. We will, however. We think that's about 20 tons per year. Wastewater overflows, that was the big issue that caused a big pulse of nitrogen in Philippi Creek. That peaked in 2018. That was about 6 tons of nitrogen. That was very important. Septic tanks, we don't really know what septic tanks do, honestly. We know that they're not a problem in large lot sizes and a high water table, a good separation between the water table and a good distance. But we also have places where we have septic tanks of more than half a dozen per acre. And that's not really a great thing. Stormwater is still the biggest source. So everything you saw about educating the public about fertilizer use, about the stormwater retrofit activities for the Bobby Jones and the quad parcels and all the pond work that Sandy's doing, all of that is really important because it's our biggest source of nitrogen and even the dissolved inorganic nitrogen, which is a specific form. Next, please. So there's more than enough. And that's really kind of important. In other words, there is more than enough for us to act upon, for us to get this bay back to the healthier condition it was 10, 15 years ago. So is there the political will? Next slide. So we had a workshop, and I apologize, it wasn't October, it was November of 2021. And we asked each of our local governments, what have you spent money on in the last 10 to 20 years on wastewater upgrades, stormwater retrofits, that's past projects, and what are you planning on spending money on in the next 5 to 10 years on wastewater upgrades and stormwater retrofits that will help us get that 12 tons? And these are the numbers. So this community has already spent over $400 million. And that doesn't include things that happened more than 20 years ago, such as the upgrade of the city of Sarasota and city of Bradenton to AWT, which took place about 30 years ago. The future contributions from local governments committing to do these projects is more than $1 billion if we take inflation into account the last couple of years. And that doesn't include habitat restoration, the kinds of projects we're talking about with the ponds. This is just hardcore engineering of wastewater and stormwater retrofits. So about $1 billion, it's a huge amount of money, but that's what it takes. If we don't spend that amount of money, we're just not going to be successful. And we don't want to spend money just to spend money. We want to spend money to make sure that we spend enough to actually get the good things done that this community expects us to have happen. So next slide, please. Is it realistic to be optimistic? And the answer is, boy, that's a tough challenge. So this graph here shows can you go back one? This graph shows the nitrogen concentrations. The red is the more recent years, the blue is our reference period. And what we want to find out is we want to get the nitrogen concentrations down from the red to the blue. And that's not a huge percentage-wise, maybe 20, 30%, but this bay is 70 billion gallons. So 20, 30% reduction across 70 billion gallons is huge. So is it possible? And the answer is, yes, it is. Next one, please. Because look what we've already done. So this is the total period of nitrogen content in Sarasota Bay going back to the 1980s. And what it shows is what we're trying to get across. This bay is not as healthy as it was 10, 15 years ago, but it is better than it was back in the 1980s. One of the problems is getting our nutrient loads back to what used to be something that we could tolerate might be harder because this bay is warmer, our air is warmer, and the bay is deeper. Not huge, but it's about 6 inches deeper than it used to be. And we think it's going to go up at least another 9 inches. So really, what future do you want? Picture on the left, Sarasota Bay, this is the recreational valley people love having. Picture on the right, Indian River Lagoon. That's where they haven't done enough. And then I'm going to end it with just this last slide. Contact, and if you want to contact any of the people on this presentation, as well as me, we all know each other. So just reach out to any one of us and you'll get a hold of whoever you want to. And I think that's it for me.
Okay, I want to thank all the panelists, and we have a number of questions in the chat, which I'd like to go over and have our panelists respond to them. There was a lot of questions related to the ponds and their maintenance, and particularly as it relates to HOAs. So let me just see if I can find it right here. So is there a state requirement for HOAs to have a long-term maintenance plan and collect reserve funds to maintain these rainwater utilities, reserve funds like you might have for road or common building maintenance? And the related question is, is there legislation that would compel HOAs to maintain these ponds in a certain fashion?
Could you shorten that question or just quickly summarize it?
Yeah, basically the questions that have to do with some of the people are responding that they have HOAs in their property maintaining the ponds. So there's a question about whether there's any legislation that would require HOAs to maintain these properly, and whether there's requirements for reserve funds and things of that nature.
There is, and we're working on tightening it up, but it's fairly loose, but they are required to maintain the ponds. The issue is if they're not doing it, the county only has so many people that might come by and say, oh, gee, you haven't done this or this. So it is a little loose. Frankly, we find most of the people we're working in communities, they call us because they have one of those problems, either out or the eroding banks, and usually the HOA is involved. And if they aren't, we see that they get involved because we can't just work with individual people. We want to work with the whole community. So the HOAs are key. And the number one thing in convincing them to have a pond program is not, frankly, how the ponds look or how much wildlife there is. It's about money. We have to show them that if they don't do what we're showing them to do, they could be looking at, one community I'm working with is $1.3 million spent by the residents to fix their ponds. That's why they do what we say. And then, yes, we get the message across about the nutrients as well, but they really do it as an investment in their own property.
Hey, Jim, could I add to that real quickly?
Sure, please.
Yes, John Thaxton, we cannot turn our cameras on. The host has our cameras locked out, so I'm not intentionally not putting my camera up there. I can't click it on. But part of the cost that the replanting has been covered by the local community foundations here and the Charles and Marjorie Baranczyk Foundation. And we find that partnering with these homeowners associations on these voluntary shoreline improvements is a really great formula. And of course, there's no better spokesperson in our region, maybe in the state, for this activity than Sandy. As you can tell, he is by the way a volunteer. He's self-taught, and he's just a remarkable asset for the communities in the 3 and 4 county area here in Sarasota.
Great. And you may have already answered this, but there's just a related question that has to do with the required stormwater management plans that are, when development is approved, they're required to presumably adopt those plans. Is that something that's new and it's only going to apply to projects going forward, or is that something that's already in place and helping to move HOAs in the right direction on managing these ponds?
Well, the majority of these stormwater regulations deal with water quantity, meaning that they are required to maintain on their property the first inch of rainfall over a particular time period. And the vast majority of the stormwater ponds were also designed for water quantity, in other words, just water storage or flood prevention. It's only been recently that the state and local governments are looking to their stormwater regulations as to how they can be improved upon so that water quality, the absorption of these nutrients, heavy metals, and things like that can be addressed in the stormwater system. So there is movement in the right direction. But historically, the vast majority, if not all of the stormwater regulations were designed, state regulations were designed for controlling flooding and water quantity, not water quality.
Right. Okay. Yeah, a lot of interest in the ponds here. And a lot of people must be living with them. A different question, have you been able to quantify the impacts of the specific bloom mentioned in Dave's talk, as well as the long-term economic impacts of algae blooms?
I can take a stab at answering that. So for example, we kind of look at it, the red tide impacts have been quantified really nicely by folks, including, the Science and Environmental, blanking on the name, John. SEC.
Council.
Yeah, there you go. I'm a member. I'm on the board. I can't
Science
remember.
and Environment Council.
That's right. I
Yeah.
screwed it up when I referenced them too. So I'm glad I'm not alone.
So they've done a great job on it. There's some really nice outside work too. There's a researcher from the University of Rhode Island who looked at real estate listings in 3 Florida counties during red tide events, and the control group was 3 Florida counties, also coastal without red tide, and found that during the red tide events, and red tide is like when you have a certain level of the organism, Corynea brevis, found that the property values went down 20 to 30% up to a mile inland during the duration. So when the red tide goes away, then it's not a problem. But I got 2 board members who are realtors, and you cannot get what you want for your waterfront property during a red tide. So there's an impact there. So that lower house price is a lower property tax that people are paying in. And our waterfront property taxes fund our police and fire and schools, because the vast majority of the folks who live on Longboat Key are paying more than someone who lives in Bradenton. So Longboat Key produces more tax revenue from Yancey County than the city of Bradenton. So we need to make sure that they have good water quality, because that's how we pay for our public infrastructure. So there's 20,000 jobs, and the property value uplift 5 years ago is estimated at $5 billion. So yeah, it's worthwhile. $1 billion is a smart investment for a bay that is worth at least $3 billion property value uplift and 20,000 jobs.
And let's not forget about the human side of this equation. Those jobs that Dave mentioned and those economic downturns in terms of the service and hospitality industry are disproportionately impacting our low wage income families. In other words, those families that are already stressed from high rental rates, inflation, the pandemic. When a red tide comes along, it's just like the final nail in the coffin, and it is actually contributing to an increased need in human services, homelessness, education, and other health-related things. So there's, it's really hard to overemphasize or overstress just how important water quality is for these hardworking lower income families.
The right way to kind of encapsulate it is humans don't cause red tide, we cause it to be worse. Red tides have been around ever, the Native Americans talked about like the time of the year when the fish died, and the conquistadors talked about something. But we're adding about 2 to 3 times as much nitrogen to our coastal waters as occurred when nobody, hardly lived here. And so we know nutrients can stimulate red tide. That's been well known for a while. We know that we're loading a lot more nutrients, so it's ipso facto, it's pretty straightforward. We are making red tides worse. We're not going to stop them, but we can stop making them as bad as they are.
Okay. Another question, any state or county restrictions on fertilizer sales or use?
Yeah, I can take that one too. I was the author of the first fertilizer ordinance in the state of Florida, and toured the state talking about the need for these fertilizer ordinances. I will be the first to admit that enforcement is difficult, but I'm a former county commissioner, so just so you know where I'm coming from. The ordinances are very important in educating the public as to the detrimental effects of fertilizing too much, fertilizing at the wrong time of the year, or fertilizing in the wrong location, what that is doing to our creeks, bays, estuaries, and nearshore Gulf waterways. We do have a fertilizer ordinance in Sarasota. It was the model ordinance. Other counties and municipalities have since improved upon what we have accomplished. So I'm not sure I would call ours the model ordinance, but it primarily is focused on what we call a blackout period, where during the rainy season, where you cannot use fertilizers that contain other than trace amounts, or you cannot use it with significant amounts of either nitrogen or phosphorus. You can still fertilize with fertilizer that doesn't contain those nutrients, but you cannot use those. And it also has things such as prohibition of fertilizing on impervious surfaces too close to the waterways. It encourages the use of time release fertilizers. So they are available. Anyone that would like to see a template for the ordinance, I can certainly provide it for you. It was originally, when I served on the state fertilizer task force, it was originally opposed by the industry. But what the fertilizer ordinance has done has created these niche, small business industries in our state that craft these fertilizers that are specific for the various regions in the state of Florida. And then the last thing that I would add, Sandy touched on this when he talked about irrigation. We have in Sarasota County, until we have, we're presently at secondary and tertiary wastewater treatment. So in the absence of advanced wastewater treatment, the reclaimed water that subdivisions are using with water sources coming from the municipalities in the county, that water alone contains more nitrogen than is recommended by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services for a healthy lawn and a landscape. So when homeowners irrigate, they're actually fertigating, and then they come along behind that and add additional fertilizer, and the plants, the lawns and the landscaping can only absorb so much nutrients. All they need is the irrigation, the fertigation water, and all of that, all of those nutrients that are being applied by fertilizer are simply seeping down into the surface water and then laterally flowing into the into the lakes and creeks.
To quantify that a little bit, we're working with a community that we just started to test their ponds for nutrients, and interesting numbers. When we started the program of putting in our plants, the nomos in this community, they had a pond nitrogen level of, let's say, about 1.2. In September, 4 months after we started, that was down by 70%. And you say to yourself, wow, that must be great. It must mean that the plants and the no-mow zone we put in to reduce the nitrogen by 70%. Wasn't the case. What really happens when there's a fertilizer ban during the summer, they're not fertilizing. And we were able to show them that when they are fertilizing, they're putting 70% too much nitrogen into their pond, not their grass, their pond. So we're starting to find numbers that quantify it on a pond by pond basis and be able to show people they can save money and send less nutrients downstream by fertilizing less. And oh, and by the way, the grass doesn't look any less. The grass looks just fine.
How is Sarasota doing, or how's the rest of the state doing compared to what you guys are doing and accomplishing in the Sarasota area?
I can take a stab at that. We look good by comparison to almost everywhere in Florida. So our last cycle, we saw a 5% loss of seagrass, which we're not happy about, but Tampa Bay lost 12% in the last 2 years on top of 16% the 2 years before that. Tampa Bay has lost about 30% of their seagrass, and the upper part of the Tampa Bay, for example, Hillsborough Bay, which is one of the first success stories out there, it has lost 80%. Old Tampa Bay has lost about 40%, the lowest amount they've had on record. Indian River Lagoon has lost about 40,000 acres of seagrass. The remaining seagrass meadows are so sparse that the food supply is down to manatees down about 90–95%. So that's why we've had the big uptick in manatee population. We've probably starved to death about a third of the manatee population on the east coast of Florida from a lack of seagrass as a food because of water pollution problems. Biscayne Bay's got the same problem. Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, Lemon Bay, and Charlotte Harbor both have less seagrass at any time in the last 30 years. So statewide, last decade, we've lost over 150 square miles of seagrass meadows. So we used to have a lot of success stories, but the last 5–10 years, it's kind of slipped away from us. And so that's a real challenge. We're growing and our wastewater and stormwater infrastructure is aging. And as you know, Sandy talked about, and Christine and John, we have stormwater infrastructure that's 30–40 years old. And 30–40-year-old ponds are just not doing what they did when they were brand new. And we need to go and act on them. And there are 90% of them are in private land, not public land. So we need to work up in the watershed, because if we don't do more quickly, it's going to slip away from us. And nobody here wants to have Sarasota Bay turn into the next Indian River Lagoon.
Well, there's quite a few resources that you guys all covered today about what's going on in Sarasota Bay. Are there similar efforts where people are coming together with nonprofits and governmental agencies to address these issues in the West Coast and other parts of Florida, or even on a statewide basis?
Their national estuary programs, there's 28 across the country. There's 4 in Florida. But I got to tell you, the level of commitment to projects from Manatee and Sarasota County, City of Sarasota, Town of Longboat Key, City of Bradenton, you know, the $1 billion commitment, no one has anything like that. Not in Tampa Bay, not in Inner River Lagoon. Tallahassee's not giving us $1 billion, neither is Washington, D.C. This is a commitment that's coming, you know, from the ground up. It's the local government, you know, local elected officials who say, what do I need to do? And when the price tag is about $1 billion, they're not blinking. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But nobody else in the state of Florida is coming close to that level of commitment as what we have here locally. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and that is precisely the reason that we did the water quality playbook, is that we knew that these decisions were going to be very difficult for our elected officials. So if you look at my last slide and you look at the names and the titles of the people that were involved, including 3 of the people that I'm looking at here on the screen right now, you know, it affords, it has the gravitas and it has the influence to build a foundation that these elected officials can make these very difficult tax appropriation decisions on. In absence of having this community support, in absence of having the subject matter experts with the data presented from a disinterested third party, which is the approach that we took with the playbook, those decisions are very hard. So it's truly a great example of a community collaboration in making some very difficult decisions. And another one that we haven't even talked about is most recently, Sarasota County was the first county in the state to have a stormwater environmental utility, meaning that there is a specific line item on your tax roll that goes to stormwater. Previously, that was only available for, again, water quality. The Board of County Commissioners, using the information of Dr. Tomasco, Christine Johnson, Sandy, and others, decided that they would make it now legal and appropriate for monies from that from that stormwater utility to be used for water quality improvement projects. So that was a major step that even the local press really didn't pick up on. But it's those small incremental steps and these relationships that we build with our elected officials that are resulting in the progress that Dave is characterizing.
Well, it looks like we're about out of time, but I want to thank all of you for excellent presentations, really informative, super interesting, and super important work that you're doing. And Kathy, do you want to give us a wrap on this? Or you're still online?
Hi, I am still online, and thank you so much to our panelists for the time that you invested in putting together your very visually appealing presentations. And we look forward to our next Global Water webinar, and hope that you'll join us. We had a really, really great turnout today, and I noticed that more people stayed on for the whole hour and a half. So I hope, and based on the comments, we know that you enjoyed it. So we look for your suggestions. We look for your participation in the water group. We're putting together additional programs for the next, 18 months or so. And we hope you really enjoyed this. There's a strong connection between water and land economics, and we want to bring as much information to you as possible. And for our guests, please consider reaching out to anyone you know at LAI to, seek a nomination. We'd love to honor you and your fabulous professional careers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.